Published in a newspaper with the title Impossible, the Titanic disappeared on April 15, 1912, leaving a trace of death in one of the greatest maritime catastrophes in history. In the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, about 250 miles south of Newfoundland and Canada, the unsinkable Titanic has disappeared forever. Just as terrible a fate as the one experienced by the passengers stuck on the ship was experienced by the people on the last lifeboat that left the Titanic. When the wreck of the Titanic was first discovered in 1985, new research into the disaster began. This brought on more details about the fatal accident and events from the night of April 15, 1912, and the famous director James Cameron made an unbreakable connection between the Titanic and modern culture with his cult film. Pictures of the last lifeboat from the Titanic, which appeared recently, drew the public's attention to the story of the forgotten victims of the catastrophe, whose fate was, in many ways, even more terrible than what the passengers who remained on the ship experienced. The Collapsible A was the last lifeboat to leave the Titanic. In fact, it was never lowered into the water, but was thrown in a panic after the ship began to sink vertically, creating a deadly vortex. He was badly damaged in the fall and was soon semi-submerged himself. The boat began to float uncontrollably as dozens of people desperately tried to climb into it. Ironically, 3 of those who succeed in doing so actually found themselves in a deadly trap. Collapsible A was discovered to be floating in the ocean only a month after the Titanic sank by the crew of the ship Oceanic. About 300 kilometers away from the location where the Titanic sank, the crew of the Oceanic noticed a floating piece of wood on May 13, 1912. In the boat, they discovered the bodies of 2 firefighters who worked in the engine room of the Titanic, and 1 first-class passenger who was still in a formal suit. The passenger was later identified as Thompson Beattie. They were all found to have died of hypothermia. In the lower part of the lifeboat, the crew found a wedding ring engraved with Edward and Gerda. A detailed account of their discovery and a photograph of the mission in which the boat was found helped the researchers identify the bodies, and thus find out part of the story of the drowned. Edvard and Gerda Lindells. The story of the couple, Edward and Gerda Lindells, is perhaps one of the most shocking love tragedies from the Titanic. Edward, a worker in a shoe factory in hope of a better life, decided to go the way of the promised land America with his wife Gerda. After arriving in Southampton, they booked a ticket for the 3rd class on the Titanic. That fateful night, they were on the deck with 2 Swedish friends, as the ship began to straighten as it sank. The deck became so steep that they all clasped hands together, and thus slid straight into the icy water. Edward and his friend Winterstrom boarded the lifeboat. His wife disappeared forever in the waves of the ocean. Horrified Edward sat down for 30 minutes and died shortly afterwards. The other passengers threw the body into the water to lighten the boat. His wedding ring with the inscription Edward and Gerda must have fallen off at some point. After it was discovered, it was handed over to Gerda's family. Thompson Beattie. A wealthy bachelor from Canada, Mr. Beattie came to France in search of a milder climate. The harsh Canadian winters just didn't suit him. His plan was to stay longer in France, but since a friend he was traveling with fell ill, he had to book a ticket for the Titanic at the last minute. Mr. Beattie wrote a letter to his mother informing her of his early departure from Europe, stating that he was returning home on an indestructible ship. Thompson Beattie paid a huge sum to find him the first-class cabin at the last minute. He was certainly one of the richest passengers on the ship. After the Titanic hit the iceberg, Beattie was among the first people to find themselves in single Atlantic water. At some point, he apparently managed to climb Collapsible A's, expecting to be safe there. However, he was not greeted by a lifeboat. He died from the cold from which he fled all of his life, hundreds of kilometers away from the Titanic. Many people disappeared into the depths of the ocean that night the Titanic sank. This is just one part of the disaster that describes this horrific event. The question remains, how, why, and why the Titanic sank? Write to us below in the comments of your opinion, and we will publish in one of the following videos a few popular theories as to why the ship was destroyed. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel as a sign of support. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.